10 years of experience in information technology and security. He is in the curriculum lead for the Blue Team courseware with the online training subject matter expert curriculum team at SANS Institute. He gained information security experience first as the owner of a business security numerous small businesses, and then security administrator for the State College in Florida and security analyst at a large pharmaceutical company. Marc has a master's degree in information assurance with a specialty in cybersecurity, and also has earned numerous industry certifications from ISACA, CRISC, GIAC, GESC.
Yeah, you can just, they're up here.
Perfect. Everything. So, thank you.
Okay. Welcome. And to begin, I have a mandatory management disclosure. I do work for the SANS Institute. I'm the Blue Team curriculum lead for the online subject matter expert team. We support students in, last time I heard, 28 countries at this point. But I'm not here as an instructor with SANS. I'm not representing SANS. This is a passion for me. My background is in Blue Team operations, and being in charge of the Blue Team curriculum, IDS. I'm not a penetration tester, red teamer, but looking at the analytics, looking at security in the cloud, there's a big difference between what we do as traditional Blue Teamers and then moving into the cloud. We're going to start looking at that today. And one thing I want to introduce to you today also, one of the common things I have when I give these talks is people ask for more information. Where can I get more information? Because in 30 or 40 minutes, we're obviously not going to be able to give you a whole lot. We're just going to be introducing the subject. So we're going to begin. This is a personal project of mine. This is not through the SANS Institute. We're beginning, starting next week, we're going to start doing some recordings. We're going to be working with this particular presentation and taking it into a lot more depth. We've set up a YouTube channel. So if you're interested in that, would like some more information or even a copy of our slides, I get that request, I see people taking pictures a lot of times. Can I get a copy of your slides? We have an email here, infosecinthecloud@gmail.com. You can feel free to email me. I'll send you the slides if you'd like a copy of them. I'll also send you a link to the YouTube channel. It's just my way to give back to the community. We're going to be setting up 5-10-minute videos, taking each subject and taking into a lot more depth. The other thing, our goals and agenda for today's talk is learn about today's threat landscape and how those threats can affect our application availability. Learn about perimeter services in the cloud that can help our applications without the need to re-architect. Learn how to meet compliance requirements easily and quickly across all the applications in our organization. It's a little bit different when we're talking about the cloud. Some of my examples are going to be from AWS. I'm not getting vendor-centric when I talk about AWS. It's just that I have to choose one particular, it's easier if I just have one to give my examples from. I'm not saying one is better than the other. In security, that's one thing I see a lot of times, people arguing about, well, this one's better, that one's better. Each one has its own strengths, and usually in security, we're not the ones who get to choose what we're using. We're usually the victims of the developers. Whatever they choose is what we end up doing. So I hear people saying, well, I prefer this one or that one. There's, for myself personally, from a security standpoint and looking what's available, I prefer AWS, but I'm also realistic and know that if my organization sets up Azure, AWS, and Google, I'm going to have to know all three of them, because my preferences usually are not going to be what's talked about. It's going to be the business is what's going to be driving this. When we talk about the business, the cloud is here. It's something we need to be thinking about. I went to reInvent this past year and saw talks. All the major companies, not only are we in the cloud, virtualized servers, virtualized infrastructure, we're moving away from that. Guardian gave a talk while I was out there. They just closed their last data center. They no longer have physical data centers, and 80% of their cloud infrastructure is now serverless. So 80% of that, Guardian's operations are completely serverless. It's all code. As security defenders, we need to be thinking about that. What does serverless mean to us? I've met with an organization while I was out at reInvent, and they had a forensics investigation. This company operates in more than 10 different countries. 90% of their infrastructure is serverless. The forensics team were given over 50 petabytes of code for the evidence. They had no images. They had no memory to image. They didn't have any devices to image. It was all code. How are we going to be handling that? We've got to be thinking about this because traditionally, it's easy when you come from a networking background, which most security people do. You have devices that you can actually touch and things like that. But now we're not dealing with those things. We're dealing with application security, which is a totally different way of thinking about it. So, an overview of the cloud threat landscape. When we're looking at it, the types of threats that we're looking at, DDoS, app vulnerabilities, bad bots. I always get people coming back and saying, well, what about this threat? What about that threat? When you're looking at the cloud, this is what you're looking at. You're looking at code. You're looking at pipelines and needing to understand not just the traditional architecture. When I say back, networking, my first job in IT was back, late 80s, setting up token ring networks. In a school. We've come a long way from them. When you look at the common attacks, HTTP floods, reflection attacks, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, crawlers, content scrapers, scanners, and probes. These are the types of things you deal with when you're working in the cloud. And you've got to be thinking about this when developing your analytics programs, metrics. What are we looking at? What kind of insight do we need to be dealing with this? The problem that I've noticed as I've, looking at it, a lot of us from a security standpoint, how many people in here have any type of development background? Okay, that's more than most of the rooms I talk to. That's what we're dealing with, is developers. It's two different worlds normally for security. And a lot of times, when you're looking at this from a security standpoint, you've got to start thinking outside the box. Because a lot of times, I know like when I was with the pharmaceutical company, we had the developers. We had, I think it was over 200 developers. We had two security analysts. Had no clue what they were doing. One time, I got permission because nobody had actually done an external scan on our network. We did an external scan on the network and discovered that our scripting system, where the pharmacist came in and did the scripting, had no authentication requirements. So I had a conversation with our developers about this. Some of the team leads, everybody else has that look I have. It's like you just have at it. And they just looked at me and said, well, I don't understand. We don't publicize that IP address. So why is that a problem? Great answer. Not publicizing, but again, it wasn't. We can look at that and say, well, those people were just absolute idiots, but they're good at what they do. They don't think the way we do as defenders. So we didn't have anyone in the security team with a background in development. I got permission. What I did was I started taking our developers aside and teaching them security concepts, and our developers actually started coming to me asking questions as their managers were assigning them things, and we started getting that communication. Because what happens so many times in security is we get an us versus them attitude. We're out there, they get this concept of we're out there just to beat them up. It's two different mindsets. We need to recognize that and understand that they don't think the way we do, and we don't think the way they do.
Jobs starting to emerge around more in the SecOps or SecDev?
DevOps, yes.
Yeah, I see a big divide there and not really an understanding coming from that network background. They are too.
Yeah. And we, regardless of our background, if we're in security, that's the world we're coming into. When you look at studies, the average company now who has gone to the serverless infrastructures, really embraced the cloud, averages sometimes over 1,000 major code releases a week. So the question is, who's doing all that? Who's reviewing that code? Who's looking at it? And you look at a lot of the models, the code reviews by security is usually after the fact. And these are things we need to be looking at and thinking about. Common DDoS attack patterns that you see related around cloud services. You got common attacks like SIM flood, UDP floods, ICMP floods, other reflection vectors, HTTP floods, DNS query floods. And one good thing about the cloud services is you can actually, if you set up your architecture correctly, And again, it's embracing and understanding that for a lot of us, it's going to have to be retraining our mindsets, because like where I come from, you have the firewall as your first line of defense, and then it goes from there. But the firewall is not even a factor when you're talking about in the cloud, because if you're not talking about, if you're not talking about a physical data center, you're talking about APIs, web applications. Those are your first lines. A lot of the companies, a lot of the cloud service providers, if it's set up correctly and you have the traffic flow done correctly, they have mitigation that can actually mitigate a lot of these attacks before you ever see them, which is great from a defender standpoint, because a lot of stuff that we deal with traditionally now becomes automated. And the other thing is, when you're looking, and that automation is really good, when you start looking in the cloud, a lot of the automation is great, because if anybody who's been around security has dealt with the network engineers, the developers, so on and so forth. I'm not criticizing them, but like my last organization, I got in there, we had locations in over 47 states. They didn't have an IDS in place. One of my jobs when I was hired was to architect an IDS for the company. And they gave me the budget for one sensor. I was like, yay. So I requested we put the sensor outside the firewall to capture all egress traffic. People say, well, that's kind of crazy. You can't track back in inside systems. What was my goal? I decided I'm not going to get any visibility really with one sensor. It's not going to tell me what's going on. Let me see what's leaving so I can sell them on buying me more sensors. A lot of people were like, well, you can't track back. I'm not looking at tracking back. I'm not looking at showing where the stuff's coming from. I want to show what's leaving so that my VPs can look at that and make a business decision. That's a good idea to fund more equipment for me. But when we put it together, the network team had never worked with the tap. So we lit up the sensor. They put it in line. It was the first time they ever did it. And it didn't look right to me at all. My gut was saying, this is not right. We had malware leaving our network. It just looked like it was a horror story going somewhere to happen. So I went back to the network team and I said, can you verify that this is wired correctly? They went and looked at it, came back to me, yes, everything's wired correctly. So I'm like, because I'm an analyst by background, I know network traffic. That didn't look right. It just didn't look right to me. They looked at it again. Yes, we wired it correctly 3 times. And finally, after 3 times, I'm like, I can't sit on this. They verified 3 times. They went, so I went to the vice president and turned in some of those 20, 30-hour days trying to clean up and things like that. Long story short, they had the network team go back 7 different times to look at this stuff. Finally, they hired an outside company who had experience with network taps. They went and looked at it. Sure enough, they had miswired it. We were looking at the ingress traffic. And who do you think was the bad person in that case? It was the security guy who thought up the idea of wiring the sensor. But see, that's the problem is, again, an advantage to the cloud. If we understand what we're working with and we take the time to educate ourselves on a new way of thinking, there's a lot of automation, a lot of things that take those dealings out of the way. And there's a lot of people who have gone before us that we can look at. For example, Netflix is one of AWS's largest groups that works with them. They use all 3 services. AWS is their primary. I don't know if anybody's ever seen their suite of tools. It's called Chaos Engineering, the Chaos Suite. And whoever had the backbone to get this authorized is awesome, but the Chaos Suite has a lot of great tools and it's open source. I recommend it highly if your company's working with it from a security standpoint. There's a lot of automation in there, and you're working off their things. But they have one thing called Chaos Monkey. Has anybody ever heard of Chaos Monkey? I love Chaos Monkey. I've talked to some people with Netflix. Chaos Monkey now, and when I say somebody had some real backbone to get this authorized, Chaos Monkey, they've got it to the point where it's fully automated in artificial intelligence. And what Chaos Monkey does is it randomly chooses one segment of Netflix's cloud infrastructure and just shuts it off. There's no testing, it's their disaster recovery testing. Just you're working and all of a sudden it's just gone. And if everything keeps working, it was set up right. But they deployed that first, I think it was in 2012, and the Chaos Monkey just runs through their network and just randomly decides on things to do, and nobody really has rhyme or reason, which is kind of cool. But you can set up Chaos Monkey on a control basis to be testing and looking at your networks too. But always talk to get approval before doing that, because you really don't know who's setting this up. Gartner actually estimates, when you look at cloud security failures, Gartner estimates that 95% of the current cloud data breaches, cloud issues we see, are a result of misconfigurations, which is not on the cloud service provider. For example, you see a lot, we can show you study after study, AWS with their S3 buckets of data being leaked last year, February last year with Walmart, with the jewelry. Did anybody read about that? One of their vendors misconfigured the S3 buckets and actually exposed the data of over 1 million of Walmart's jewelry customers to the public. Nobody knows if it was actually accessed, but they discovered it. And if you know anything about AWS, there's actually a button you have to push to make it publicly available. So somebody misconfigured it. So when we look at this, how can we protect our cloud application from these threats? This is a traditional way of thinking. Your end users interact with systems in your corporate data center, then you have your API, personalized content, dynamic applications, and static assets. From a traditional mindset, we're looking at, again, the firewall, we're looking at IDS, we're looking at things online that you can do this, but when you're getting into a serverless infrastructure, how do you build anything in line or not? It's going to be taking a whole different type of mindset to look at this and how we secure this. So with the web application attacks, you have your DDoS app vulnerabilities, you got your bots attacking the systems that are hosting your web applications. And the type of things you have to be looking at, not only in addition to the traditional, but you also have to be looking, like, from a security standpoint, we have to be looking at authentication, encryption, your layered protection, resilience, fault tolerance, request handling capacities, how do we block the bad traffic, routing, throttling, alerting, and monitoring. These are things we have to be thinking about, but then you also have to be communicating with your teams to know how they resource things. This was brought home. We've all had one of those moments where, whoops, if you've been in security long enough. One of my favorite whoops moments was at the pharmaceutical company. I didn't realize it, but our server team was so under-resourced, and we had VMware, so on-site hosting. They had only provisioned our servers for 1% threshold resources. I don't know if you were there when we did this with the AWS Pong, but if you'd already left. So we were looking at GeoIP blocking using host-based firewall rules. I built the rule. We didn't activate the rule or put it in a blocking mode. I built it and deployed it. I was going to put it in allow to start looking at what happened. Just deploying that one rule caused a threshold, cascading threshold failure that resulted in over 1,000 servers going kabunk. Were you there for that? I didn't even hit it into block or anything. It was just allow, but the servers weren't built to that capacity. The nice thing about the cloud is you can build the servers. There's a lot of automation where something like that is not going to happen to avoid that. And nobody, even our server team, didn't realize that they had built it with such small thresholds on their resources. Anybody ever had an experience like that? You get a call on a Sunday, what's going on? The whole company's offline, and it's your fault. Build it. So how do we build the baseline layer of defenses? And again, I'm not being one vendor over another. I'm just using one as an example. Azure, you can find similar type components. So your basic building blocks for baseline defense. AWS, Virtual Private Cloud, where you have your security groups, your network ACLs. The Virtual Private Cloud allows you to encompass your networks in just like virtual isolated network. You can set up different groups. One thing that's nice, I know both Azure and AWS do it. One thing that's nice that you can also do to take it even further, AWS has AWS organizations where you can set up each department, each group within your company in a separate account. So if one account gets compromised, they've only got one account. But then AWS organization actually enables you to manage your accounts like an AD, like an AD. So even though everybody's in a separate AWS account for billing purposes, they're managed as one. You got CloudFront, provides a global presence, SSL, TLS, encryption, origin shielding, resilience. The origin shielding is nice because you can actually, rather than have your users interacting with your web applications versus via the systems that are hosting those applications, they can be interacting through an edge location. I know Azure has edge locations. The origin shielding is nice because there's no way, because they're dealing with the CloudFront, they're not dealing with your systems, there's no way for them to trace it back to your IP address ranges, because they're only going to see CloudFront. CloudFront's also nice because you can cache your system, so if the internal web applications for some reason were brought down, all the static content is going to still be there and available even though the servers themselves are gone. So operations like that, security likes it, but it gives you the global presence. Last time I checked, they have edge locations. I know AWS has edge locations in over 250 countries, which brings it out to the users. Last time I looked, Azure had edge locations in 100 countries. And then Route 53 gives you DNS header validations, priority-based traffic shaping. But again, from a traditional security mindset, these are not necessarily things we're looking at. We don't look at traffic shaping, that's usually the engineering side. But from a security standpoint within the cloud, there's a lot we can do this here. There's a lot of visibility. The other thing that's nice is over here is in the VPC. You've got things logically isolated, but if anybody does any type of analyst work, one thing that is great for incident response, something like that, is network flows. NetFlow is really easy with this right here. It's one button, you push it, and you've got net flows for 100% of your traffic. You don't have to worry about sensors, you don't have to worry about how you build it. You got NetFlow, complete visibility. I can do that in Azure and I can do it in AWS, which is great. I don't have to go to somebody and say, hey, I need sensors here, here, and here. I don't need to try to isolate and figure out where things are. You can just go in here and get your visibility you need. And if anybody's ever fought that battle trying to get budget for sensors and things like that, there just is never enough visibility. Unless I was the only one that ever had that problem. So how do we set up the baseline defenses? Again, you got your end users. They're, in the previous architecture, they're dealing with the corporate assets, so they're dealing with your servers that are hosting web applications. These are just two AWS services. Like I said, Azure has similar. So instead of, you have your content over here, you've got the servers that are handling it. But instead of dealing with your systems, they're accessing your web content through these two services, which gives you an extra layer of protection as a security defender because nobody's touching your actual systems. Again, origin protection, this is shielding your IP address ranges, so if they scan this, they're going to see CloudFront's IP addresses, they're not going to see anything that you've built here. From a security standpoint, that's a great thing. Amazon Route 53 enables you to do traffic shaping, and as I said, Azure has similar things that you can do this, and then you have the S3 buckets for static content. So what about DDoS attacks? AWS provides Shield Standard at no additional charge, which is basically always-on detection that provides automatic inline mitigations against attack. It's designed to protect your entire cloud infrastructure. Basically what Shield does is they have black box technology that is in line with all the traffic hitting your network. You get complete visibility into that traffic. You don't have to budget for sensors or anything like that. Azure has a similar type service, and that traffic will score, that sensor will actually score traffic as it's hitting you from a suspicion score. So as a defender, we can say, anything that's only like 2 or below that is not highly suspicious will allow. But then anything that has a higher suspicion score, we can actually say it's going to be sent to us for approval, or it can be just totally blocked. That right there is at no additional charge when you set up CloudFront from a defender standpoint. Also, like I said, with CloudWatch, within AWS and Azure has similar type services, you can get complete analytics and complete visibility into all of that traffic hitting your network. I know in the networks where I've seen before, when you have multiple servers, handling your web applications, you're going to have sensors on all those servers and have to have it. With this, from a security standpoint, it's all right there accessible to you. The other thing that's nice about this is with AWS Shield, they have automatic scaling. And the problem with the DDoS attack, you may set up your defenses where they're not going to get through, but sooner or later they're going to overwhelm your resources. In the cloud, it can actually scale and increase your resources, which is a cost to it. But the nice thing is when you funnel people through CloudFront, AWS Shield will actually do the scaling at no cost to you. Advanced provides enhanced protections, 24/7 access to the DDoS response team. Microsoft has a similar, which provides protection against economic damage, because a lot of times, in the cases that I've looked at, customers who have gone to the advanced level, a lot of times these attacks are mitigated before, and then security is notified after the fact. They don't pull you in necessarily to be dealing with it. They just tell you, oh, by the way, this happened and we took care of it. And this is all the data and around it for you to do internal research and figure out what happened. Setting up your baseline defenses with this. Shield, again, is something that's, the basic is at no cost, but you just basically wrap it around Amazon CloudFront and Route 53. I've been in several organizations and looked at it that didn't have this set up, but you don't have to have any budget to get this set up, and it just provides you a lot of extra. So again, it's not, you're not even up to your assets at this point. It's just extra layers of defense before you even get into your organization's defenses. Mitigation on the edge network. This applies, like I said, to all of the cloud service providers have this type of mitigation. Fully inline packet inspection, blocking known bad traffic scores, suspicious traffic, sub-second latency to detect and mitigate attacks, SIM proxy challenges, illegitimate connections without maintaining state, anycast routing, DNS-based traffic detection. Pretty much all of the cloud services providers will provide this to us. And again, all of these things right here, there's no extra configuration for us to get analytics into this. Significant attacks that were tracked by the AWS DDoS response. To give you an idea how this works, there was a Fortune 500 company. They had a web application. Their main web applications were targeted by a 1.4 terabyte memcache reflection attack in March of 2018. It was mitigated with CloudFront and AWS Shield. None of the web applications received any type of latency or bandwidth issues as a result of this attack. It was totally invisible to the client. November 2018, web applications running on CloudFront for Fortune 100 company were targeted by 20 million requests per second. The attack was automatically mitigated. They scaled the resources, totally invisible to the client. So from a security standpoint, this is great. They actually had this one, if you look at the case study on this one, they actually mitigated this, had it mitigated and stopped and totally blocked within 20 seconds of it being detected, without having to contact the internal security teams and say this is going on. And then they sent all the data to the internal security team. They had the material to do analytics and process and look at what happened and how this could be avoided. Benefits of moving user interaction to an edge network from a security standpoint. High availability, that makes everybody internally happy. Security no longer is the ones causing the issues. Application acceleration. Again, with code releases coming as fast as they are, from a security standpoint, it makes it a lot easier for us, allowing code through that we wouldn't necessarily be researching. Cloud service integration. You're going to see in most organizations, when I look at case studies, a lot of the larger implementations of cloud are no longer, oh, we're all in AWS shop or we're all in Azure shop. You're seeing everything in there. You're seeing multiple cloud providers. Kafka, you're seeing Jenkins, you're seeing AWS, Azure. Netflix actually has on the open source, they have a GitHub repository for a service they call Spinnaker. And has anybody ever heard of their Spinnaker service? They actually manage all of their clouds. Last time I talked to one of their engineers, they had 15 different cloud providers, but they manage all of it off of one dashboard. They can do all their AWS resources, all their Azure resources, everything off of one dashboard. You're also seeing a recognition of the cloud service integration by the providers. I haven't had a chance to really research it since reInvent, but when I was out at reInvent this last year in Las Vegas, they actually did a demonstration. AWS engineers did a demonstration of a new dashboard that was coming out. I don't know what the exact release date was, where you could actually manage your Azure resources from within your AWS management console. And they were demonstrating that, and I'm like, never thought I'd see that one. The other thing that with these integrations we've got to be considering, like with the serverless architecture, is what kind of code is being written out there. Has anybody ever heard of Lambda bring anything? So they introduced this last year. From a security standpoint, I'm going, oh crap. Because what they're saying is, with Lambda bring anything, Lambda code, they're rolling it out right now. Basically, any programming language the developer's comfortable with, they can write Lambda functions, which is their serverless architecture. So if they want to write COBOL or Pascal, they can do it. I actually saw a demonstration of COBOL, which, from my background, that's my first language I learned, and I'm like, does anybody even use that anymore? So now you're going to have attackers also using that. And when we talk about Lambda functions from a security standpoint, there's a similar type thing in Azure. Lambda is one of the best friends of a security professional, but you've got to learn how to code it and you've got to learn how to understand it. But if you do, the automation, the things you can do with it, the analytics, I mean, you can put together a very cost-effective data lake for your security data at very little cost. You put it in, where you can actually have lifecycle policies where things go into very deep storage. I actually was able to set up a 25 petabyte data lake with full analytics in less than 30 minutes. So it's very easy to do. And guess what? Because we're only paying for what's going in there, so you're not actually paying for that storage capacity unless you're accessing the data. You don't have any type of CapEx or OpEx for building that. And anybody who's done any type of analyst work knows it's like pulling teeth to get anybody to budget your storage and things like for logs. I remember when I was at the college, I was at a state college here in Florida running security. I wanted to have 1 day's full packet capture. I fought leadership for months and months to try to get storage for my systems. Ended up, they gave me budget to get USB drives, so I ended up getting like 6 4 terabyte USB drives, and I was plugging them into the... It was so much easier and cost effective. A lot of organizations right now are hybrid, but we're moving in this direction. I mean, when you look at the organizations, for example, I just saw a couple weeks ago there was an article from the US DoD. In 2016 at this time, they were operating 110 data centers worldwide. Today, 60% of those data centers have been shut down and moved to GovCloud, which just so happens to be running on AWS background, with a goal by 2020 to have all of their data centers shut down in the cloud. I have security defenders say, well, it's not happening in our company yet. It's going to get there. I have a caption in another slide. With the guy who's talking on the phone, he said, we've done our research and decided the cloud's not viable for us. It's not something that's really going to provide us much benefit. And I've put all my studies and all my results into Dropbox for you. It's a great one. But that's the way a lot of people think, is it's not happening to us. I was working at one company, we were doing incident response, and discovered they had an Azure deployment that had been in place for like 3 years. The security team didn't have a clue that Azure deployment was even there. So it's coming. So what are some tools to help with security and compliance? Web Application Firewall. If you're in the cloud, you should have a WAF in place. It provides customized security to your applications using custom rules. Utilize managed rules for hassle-free protection and deployment. You monitor using custom metrics from built-in services, for example, with AWS CloudWatch or third-party log processors. You can automate using built-in security automations like Lambda. When we talk about Lambda, as an idea, so when we talked about, in CloudFront, they have the suspicion scores where they're scoring traffic hitting you. You can actually set up Lambda functions that will trigger based on those scores and how it'll actually put it into dashboards. I actually have sat through a demonstration, the Elk stack with Kibana dashboards. I've actually seen a demonstration now of a complete Elk stack with Kibana dashboards that's serverless, running on 0 servers, and having the dashboard actually populated by Lambda functions firing off behind the scenes. Like I said, this is one of our best friends in security if we learn how to use it. Just like any tool, if you don't know how to use it. Capabilities that this gives you. Malicious traffic blocking, SQL injection conditions, XSS conditions, cloud service edge location security, automation managed rules. You can set up rate-based rules, IP match and GeoIP filters, regex, string match conditions, size constraint conditions, your metrics, your automation, all of this in the WAF. This is provided within the cloud services. Probably the majority of companies I've talked to in the past year that are in the cloud haven't even configured one of these. But from a security defender's point of view, this is one of our best friends in the cloud, because now we're not talking your traditional firewalls, your traditional infrastructure, you're talking web applications. This is, like, to me, a priority that we should be looking at getting in place. How does it sustain compliance? You got PCI, OFAC, HIPAA, GDPR. A lot of people are not familiar with OFAC. Has anybody ever heard of that? Okay. A lot of people aren't even aware of that. If we have an OFAC requirement. Let me just go back here. It's the Office of Foreign Asset Control. It maintains a list of country IP addresses from a sanction list that must be blocked. Now, there are no OFAC audits per se. I first learned about this when I was at the college. We had a data breach. The federal investigators came in, and they said, well, you don't have these IP addresses blocked. Is there a reason? Well, we had no equipment on site that could block things. That seemed like a good reason to me. They brought up OFAC. And they said, this is an automatic fine. Every organization that has a web presence has OFAC requirements for blocking these IP addresses. AWS provides cloud templates. Azure has lists where the WAF will actually has that built in. You don't have to do anything to maintain your lists. You don't have to be looking up, updating, looking to see. It's just taken care of behind the scenes, and you're in compliance. So from a security defender, that's a great thing. From a metric standpoint, again, we don't have time to go into full detail. I got demonstrations I'm going to put out. It's going to be over time, but we're going to be putting out demonstration things to show how to do this step by step with what I had up front, because I want to have more time. But again, 30, 40 minutes. We're just introducing you to a lot of things. But this right here is a great thing, being able to block these things. Because that's always your favorite thing, is when the feds show up. Has anybody ever had that precious experience? Yeah. If you're in security long enough, you will have that wonderful experience. When I was at the state college, we had America's stupidest criminal working for us, in my mind. When I say that, and I'll close with this, he came in to the college and applied for a job in financial aid while he was on parole waiting trial for stealing student data at another college. And got hired. So he got put through the background check. So the way I find out about this, while he's on parole waiting trial for stealing student data, he's taking screenshots of our student data in our financial aid because we hired him because it passed through our background check, and he was selling marijuana to the students on campus. So when I say America's stupid criminal, I'm like, who does that? So he comes in, the feds got involved. They called me in. We had all our laptops encrypted, so I was called in to decrypt, put in the code for the decryption. If you've ever worked at a college, anybody in here work at a college? Yeah, your favorite words that come from, in my experience, your favorite words that always come from admin is student enrollment. That drives everything, student enrollment. So our VPs and our president got together. This was all without me knowing. I was in charge of security. They got together and decided, well, this could hurt student enrollment if it gets out. So they lied to the federal investigators and said that their IT security administrator would not be available, but they had a desktop technician that would be able to put in the code.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that, and they sent me in to put the code in. I was a security administrator, and they saw that on the website. So we sit down, and I put in the code. It's going to take 8 to 10 hours. And the agent looked at me and he said, I started to walk out. I said, my office is just down the hall. He's in the conference room. He's going to stay on site all day. He's like, and so I started to walk out. I said, just let me know if you need anything. And he said, well, where do you think you're going? Well, to my office. I told him, I said, I'm staying on site if you ever need anything. He says, no, you're not leaving the room. You know, I'm like looking at him going, what did I do? So he sits me down. I said, well, let me get my computer. We'll just work because it's going to take 8 or 10 hours. He said, oh, you're not going to need your computer. And whoever in admin thought it was a good idea to put me in there for 8 to 10 hours without their lawyer present was, you know, because I'm not willing to hold anything back. It's just not worth it. So we sat there for 8 to 10 hours. He called some agents up in Washington, D.C. We had a nice conversation about all the things going on at the college. And the thing about OFAC, PCI, if you're in a company that pulls any type of data, IER, off of a federal system, that data remains the property of the U.S. government. Like forever. So as they kept lying, when I left the college finally, they actually, because of the obstruction and because we didn't want to hurt student enrollment, I don't know what's worse, if you just admit this happened and move on, or if you find out that we tried to hide it so you wouldn't find out. They actually had filed charges for misuse of federal property against all the VPs and the president of the college. But that was a learning experience. Compliance is important. Yeah, it was great. It wasn't me. So, PCI requirement, you know, again, 6.6 PCI DSS 3.0 states the web application firewall should be implemented. Azure and AWS both provide these that are PCI compliant. HIPAA, GDPR, both of these are here. If you're in Azure, this is something you need to be aware of. AWS is a little bit easier. I'm not beating up one or the other. And the reason we'll say this, and we're finishing up, is because with AWS, if you say, I'm going to put my data in this region, AWS will never move that data. That data will stay there until you move it. You control where the data goes. Azure, if you look at it, the Active Directory, and I just looked at it a few weeks ago, it's still this way. Their Active Directory is only in 2 regions. So if you say I'm going to put it in this region, and that region doesn't have Active Directory, it's still going out of another region. So your data is not where you think it is. Where I first learned this about Azure is when I was at the college. We implemented Azure. I started seeing on our IDS traffic to Singapore and Ireland. The admins have been guaranteed by Azure our data wouldn't leave. We said, you know, as I started looking at it, was Microsoft data centers was where that traffic was going, and I was like, wait a minute, that traffic shouldn't be leaving. So I got the Azure representatives and looked, and they actually looked me in the eye. And if you look through their very, very, very long, you know, terms of agreement, you'll see all this. They looked me in the eye and said, well, your data is not actually leaving the U.S., but for resiliency, we maintain backups of your data in these data centers. And I said, well, that's my data. They said, no, that's not your data. Those are backups of your data. They said, your data is right where you put it. I'm still, to this day, trying to figure out how backup's not my data, but I'm not beating up on one or the other, but when you're looking at compliance, you could end up with a GDPR requirement that you don't know about because you're in an organization, in a cloud service provider that is sending your data somewhere where you don't know where it's at. So you need to be aware of this as a security professional. Again, we're going to be putting out some more information. We've set up some blogs and different things. It's just to introduce you today. We're at the end of our time. It's just infosecindthecloud@gmail.com. You can email me. I'll give you access. I'll send you a link to our channel. It's just my way of giving back to the community. I'm going to take each of these subjects and go a little bit more deeper, do demonstrations. It'd just be a project that goes on at the request when I've done these talks before, just to make some extra things available to you. If you have any questions, you can feel free to email me at that address. And I appreciate y'all's time. So.